Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a task just, sitting on your desk right now.
Just a completely mundane little chore.
Right. It looks totally harmless. You've prioritized it for later in the week because, well, maybe you read a popular productivity book that told you to focus your morning on your single biggest goal.
Which is pretty much what we've all been taught to do, right?
Exactly. But what if I told you that because you decided to organize your to-do list using that specific globally celebrated hack, that mundane little task is slowly turning into a career-ending malpractice lawsuit?
Yeah, that is a massive shift in perspective.
It really is. Today, we're going on a deep dive into why everything you know about individual time management is not just structurally flawed, but, well, it might actually be a dangerous liability.
And that is the terrifying reality for millions of knowledge workers right now. I mean, we've spent the last 2 decades absolutely obsessed with optimizing the individual.
Oh, totally.
We buy the fancy planners, we download all the apps, we worship at the altar of the perfectly balanced morning routine.
I'm definitely guilty of that.
Right. But when you apply those highly personalized, willpower-based frameworks to the complex, heavily regulated, high-stakes environment of professional services, the entire architecture just completely collapses under its own weight.
Which means we basically need to completely rethink what it even means to be productive. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together an incredibly diverse and frankly completely contradictory stack of sources.
It's a really wild mix.
It is. We're exploring the evolution of focus, time management, and the systemic dangers of modern productivity culture. So we've got a fascinating review of the 2026 app landscape from the Frogged blog. We are tearing into foundational texts like Cal Newport's Deep Work and Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog.
The classics.
Yeah, the absolute classics. Plus, we've got these essays debating the underlying neuroscience of the flow state versus deliberate practice. And then, to just completely pull the rug out from under all of it, we're analyzing a brilliant piece from a platform called Dutiful, which deconstructs the catastrophic failure of personal time management in professional settings.
And the contrast in your source material is really what makes this so compelling. You have the microscopic view, like how to literally force your own brain to focus for 45 minutes on a Tuesday morning.
Right.
And then you have the macroscopic view, how an entire firm prevents a single missed deadline from detonating its entire balance sheet. The tension between those two realities is where modern work actually happens.
Yeah, and our mission today is to bridge that exact gap. As someone who admittedly loves a good bento box style to-do list and, like a sleek new focus app, I'm going to guide you through the absolute best personal productivity hacks available today.
You're playing defense for the individual.
I am. I'll advocate for the individual. But I know you are prepared to introduce the systemic reality that proves why my beautiful, color-coded to-do list is basically a ticking time bomb.
Oh, I absolutely am.
But to get there, we really have to start at the genesis of the modern productivity movement. We have to talk about the amphibian in the room. What does it actually mean, biologically and psychologically, to eat the frog?
It's funny. It's probably the single most ubiquitous metaphor in corporate culture, but it's rarely examined beyond, a surface-level motivational poster.
Right. And the grandfather of this concept is Brian Tracy, who popularized it in his 2001 book, Eat That Frog. He based it on a quote often attributed to Mark Twain. If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first.
A charming visual.
Isn't it? We all know the basic premise. Your frog is your most dreaded, complex task. The rule is to tackle it before you check a single email. Tracy leans heavily on the 80-20 rule, but he kind of weaponizes it.
How so?
Well, he essentially demands that you abandon the 80% of easy, comforting tasks to force the completion of the vital 20%.
Which is fascinating, because the underlying mechanism here isn't just about time allocation. It's actually about neurochemistry.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, when you have a dreaded task hanging over your head, your amygdala is subtly activated. It registers that task as a low-level threat. And that threat generates a continuous background hum of anxiety.
Like a cognitive tax.
Exactly. Think of it as a cognitive tax. You're paying that tax all morning while you're answering emails or organizing your digital folders. Your brain is literally burning metabolic energy, just suppressing the anxiety of the unwritten report.
I feel that viscerally. You sit in a status meeting, nodding along, but your internal monologue is just a screaming alarm about the proposal you haven't even started yet.
We've all been there. And by forcing yourself to tackle the frog first, you don't just finish a task, you eliminate that cognitive tax immediately.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Furthermore, when you complete a highly aversive task, Your brain experiences this massive reward prediction error. You anticipated pain, but you achieved resolution. This triggers a massive release of dopamine.
So you get high off finishing it.
Basically, yeah, that positive neurochemical state creates a halo effect that carries through the rest of your day, making you significantly more resilient to smaller stressors. You are essentially turning your brain's avoidance instinct into a slingshot for momentum.
Wow. And Tracy provides several tactical methodologies to actually, get yourself to take that first bite. He
Yeah.
uses the ABCDE method for ruthless categorization, where A tasks are your frogs and C tasks are like networking or soft consensus building.
But the real friction happens when you're staring at an A task that is so monolithic you don't even know how to open the document, right?
Exactly. And the sources detail two fascinating psychological workarounds for that, the salami slice and the Swiss cheese methods.
Both of which are great because they address the concept of activation energy, the minimum amount of energy required to initiate a reaction.
Right, so the salami slice method is highly logical. You wouldn't eat a whole roll of salami at once. You slice it.
Unless you're really hungry.
Fair. But in work, you map out the entire architecture of a massive project, but you refuse to look at the whole thing.
Mm.
You resolve to execute just one sequential slice of the job, like you write the introduction paragraph. That's it.
Which really appeals to the rational planning part of the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. But the Swiss cheese method is radically different and honestly a bit chaotic.
It really abandons sequential logic entirely, doesn't it?
It totally does. If a task is just this massive block of work that you're avoiding out of pure emotional dread, you just punch a hole in it.
Yeah.
You decide to spend exactly 5 minutes working on any random disparate part of it. You format the bibliography, you find 3 images for the slide deck, you just poke holes in the task.
The brilliance of the Swiss cheese method is that it recognizes when resistance is purely emotional rather than logistical.
Right.
When you don't know where to start, the friction of figuring out the perfect sequence is enough to cause paralysis. By punching a random hole, the goal isn't to be efficient. The goal is simply to transition your brain from a state of resting to a state of motion.
Just getting started is half the battle.
Right. In physics, static friction is always higher than kinetic friction. It takes more force to get a stationary object to move than it takes to keep it moving. You punch a hole just to overcome that static friction.
But I want to introduce a real-world case study here because, the theoretical neurochemistry sounds great, but human application is messy.
Always.
We have this illustrative piece from Stacy McNaught, who ran a strict 3-week empirical test of the Eat the Frog hack. She documented her emotional and output states, and the results validate your dopamine theory, but they introduce a severe secondary complication. She found her overall output spiked. By lunchtime, she felt invincible. The dread was totally gone.
Yet she ultimately abandoned the practice, didn't she?
She did. She experienced something she termed severe morning dread, knowing that the absolute worst, most painful task of her entire professional life was waiting for her the very second she opened her laptop began to ruin her evenings and her mornings. Yeah, getting out of bed became an exercise in misery. She was spiking her morning cortisol to such an extreme degree that she was essentially destroying her quality of life before 9 a.m. just to save her afternoons.
And this perfectly illustrates the biological limitation of a purely willpower-based approach. Willpower is not an infinite resource. It draws heavily on blood glucose levels and emotional regulation.
It runs out.
It does. If the cost of your daily productivity is waking up with dread every single morning, your nervous system will eventually rebel. It leads directly to burnout, or what psychologists call ego depletion.
Which introduces a vital counter-perspective from our Lumivero blog source, which advocates for a completely oppositional strategy, the easy win.
Ah, yes. The total opposite.
The easy win completely flips Brian Tracy on his head. Jennifer Schultz, writing for Lumivero, points out that the sheer magnitude of a frog can trigger the freeze response.
Yep, the deer in headlights.
Exactly. The friction is so high that you end up doom-scrolling LinkedIn for 2 hours, achieving zero output. So the easy win strategy suggests you intentionally bypass the frog and knock out 3 or 4 simple, low-stakes tasks first. You clear your inbox, you sign the expense reports.
The theoretical mechanism here is confidence building through microdopamine hits. You establish a feeling of competence. You prove to your brain that you are capable of executing tasks today. You build up enough kinetic energy through the easy wins to eventually turn and face the massive aversive task.
I have to challenge that, though. Is eating the frog really just about momentum? It feels like the easy win strategy is the equivalent of doing a grueling, low-intensity cardio session before you try to hit a personal record in Olympic weightlifting.
That's a great analogy.
Like, sure, you're sweaty, you're in motion, but haven't you just depleted the exact glycogen stores you need for the heavy lift? If I spend my morning willpower clearing out my inbox, do I actually have the deep cognitive reserves left to write a complex strategy document at 2 p.m.?
And that is the ultimate danger of the easy win. Schultz herself actually cautions that it requires immense self-awareness.
How so?
If you're paralyzed by a specific fear, say, the fear of a client rejecting a proposal, an easy win might break the paralysis. But if you lack discipline, the easy win strategy just becomes a sanctioned excuse for productive procrastination.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Right. You check off 50 minor emails, you feel a false sense of accomplishment, but the needle hasn't actually moved on the work that generates value.
It's the illusion of velocity. You feel like you're moving fast, but you're just spinning on a hamster wheel, which means that figuring out what to do first is really only a fraction of the problem. If eat the frog dictates how we initiate our morning, how do we organize the structural container of the day itself?
That's the real question.
Because a list of 50 tasks without boundaries is just a scroll of anxiety. To escape the emotional tax of dread, people historically tried to remove emotion entirely by using math, which leads us to the mathematical frameworks of productivity.
The numbers games. These frameworks are attempts to put artificial boundaries on our infinite desires to get things done, recognizing that our cognitive capacity is, deeply finite.
The sources outline a fascinating lineage here, starting with the oldest and perhaps most famous, the Ivy Lee method from 1918.
The classic.
The historical context is incredible. Charles M. Schwab, the president of Bethlehem Steel and one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time, was desperate to boost his executive team's efficiency. So he hires Ivy Lee, a pioneer in the early public relations industry. Schwab wants a system.
And instead of a complex corporate overhaul, Lee just hands him a piece of paper with a brutally simple algorithm.
Yeah. Lee tells Schwab's executives to implement a rigid daily protocol. At the end of every workday, write down the 6 most important things you need to accomplish tomorrow. You are mathematically forbidden from writing down a 7th.
Strict limits.
It's very strict. You rank those 6 items in order of true objective importance. The next morning, you start on item number 1. You are not allowed to look at or touch item number 2 until number 1 is completely finished. You work sequentially. Whatever you don't finish gets rolled over to the new list of 6 for the next day. Lee told Schwab to test it for 90 days and pay him whatever the advice was worth.
And Schwab ultimately wrote Lee a check for $25,000, which in today's currency is roughly $400,000.
$400,000 for the advice of write down 6 things and do them in order. Why is that algorithm so valuable?
Because it solves 2 massive cognitive bottlenecks that destroy executive function. First, by artificially capping the list at 6 items, it forces brutal, painful prioritization.
Right, you can't do everything.
In a modern corporate environment, you can easily hide a lack of strategic focus behind a list of 40 minor tasks. You can't hide on a list of 6. The math forces you to decide what actually matters.
And the second bottleneck.
Second, by demanding the list be made the night before, it entirely eliminates morning decision fatigue.
Because your prefrontal cortex is fresh in the morning.
Exactly. Making a decision about priority burns the exact same cognitive fuel as executing the task itself. If you spend your highest energy hours at 8 a.m. just looking at your inbox, trying to adjudicate what is most important, you are depleting the tank before you've done any actual work.
So true.
The Ivy Lee method offloads the decision-making to the tired brain at 5 p.m., reserving the fresh brain at 8 a.m. purely for execution.
It's a brilliant hack. But as the dutiful article points out, the Ivy Lee method has evolved into several modern numerical offshoots tailored to the chaos of digital work. We have the 1-3-5 rule. You're allowed 1 big task, 3 medium tasks, and 5 small tasks. That caps your daily universe at exactly 9 items.
And the mathematical precision of the number 9 is not an accident.
No, the reasoning is deeply rooted in cognitive psychology. Capping the list at 9 items is explicitly designed to fit within the constraints of human working memory. It references George Miller's famous psychological concept of the magical number 7 plus or minus 2.
Right, our brains can only hold between 5 and 9 items in our active working memory at any given time.
Right. If your to-do list has 20 items, you literally cannot conceptualize the scope of your day. A list of 9 allows you to visually and mentally hold your entire day in your head simultaneously.
It creates a forced hierarchy that perfectly aligns with our neurology. You physically cannot have 5 number one priorities. The framework simply forbids it.
Then we have Oliver Burkeman's 333 rule. Berkman proposes structuring your day with 3 hours of deep, cognitively demanding work, followed by 3 urgent but shorter tasks like crucial emails or client calls, and finally 3 maintenance tasks, which are the administrative chores that keep the lights on, like updating a spreadsheet or paying a bill.
The 333 rule is fascinating because it is fundamentally a philosophical retreat.
What do you mean by retreat?
Well, Berkman's entire thesis is rooted in the acceptance of human mortality. His book, 4,000 Weeks, points out that a human life is incredibly brief, and the modern knowledge worker will never, under any circumstances, reach the bottom of their to-do list.
That is painfully true.
Right. So the 333 rule is an operational output of surrendering to that limitation. It is a direct, almost visceral reaction against the methodology that defined the early 2000s, David Allen's Getting Things Done, or GTD.
Oh man, GTD was a religion for a decade. The core tenet was capturing everything, every stray thought, every minor chore, every massive project had to be dumped out of your brain and into a trusted external system.
And Berkman argues that capturing everything is exactly what broke us.
Really?
Yeah, by building an infinite, perfectly categorized reservoir of every possible obligation, GTD created a machine that constantly reminds you of your own inadequacy. It treats human capacity as endlessly scalable. Berkman's 333 rule is about retreating from the infinite. It protects 3 hours of cognitive depth and accepts that the rest of the universe will just have to wait.
Which brings us to the final mathematical framework in our sources, the 7-8-9 rule. This zooms out from tasks entirely and allocates the 24 hours of a day. So it's 7 hours of focused work, 8 hours of sleep, and 9 hours of life. Family, exercise, cooking, staring at a wall.
It feels like a very modern post-pandemic burnout prevention strategy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But its lineage is the oldest of all.
Really?
Yeah, it traces directly back to the Welsh textile manufacturer and social reformer Robert Owen. In 1817, during the brutal peak of the Industrial Revolution, Owen coined the labor movement slogan, 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest.
So the 7-8-9 is just an updated labor strike against the digital factory.
Basically, it's an update based on modern cognitive science. Research consistently demonstrates that high-quality, complex knowledge work severely degrades after about 6 to 7 hours. Pushing for a 10-hour workday of deep cognitive effort doesn't produce more value. It produces errors that take 2 hours to fix the next day.
I love the history here, but I have to point out the glaring flaw in all of these systems.
Let's hear it.
When you look at the 135, the 333, the 7-8-9, they're just different ways of packaging time. It's like comparing different brands of Tupperware.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The 135 rule is a beautifully compartmentalized bento box. The 333 is a heavy-duty thermos. They give you a satisfying, rigid structure to carry through your day. But none of these mathematical rules actually dictate the nutritional value of the meal you put inside the containers.
That is the critical distinction. They organize your temporal capacity, but they're entirely agnostic to the substance and quality of the work itself.
Exactly. Telling someone to sit at their desk and do 3 hours of deep work is a great structural command, but filling those 3 hours requires a fundamental understanding of the cognitive mechanics of focus. And that brings us to the most intense debate in our sources.
The core tension of modern knowledge work.
Right. We have to look at the seductive illusion of the flow state versus the gritty, uncomfortable reality of Cal Newport's deep work.
And this is the transition from managing our calendars to managing our neural pathways, which is an infinitely more difficult proposition.
So Cal Newport's deep work framework is the bedrock of this conversation. He draws an absolute unyielding line between shallow work and deep work. Shallow work is the logistical, non-cognitively demanding friction of corporate life. It's answering Slack messages, attending alignment meetings, moving data from one spreadsheet to another.
Stuff you can do while listening to a podcast.
Exactly. You can execute shallow work while you are highly distracted. It doesn't require intense focus, and crucially, it doesn't create much new value in the marketplace.
Shallow work is the baseline effort required to keep you from getting fired. It maintains the status quo.
But deep work is entirely different. Newport defines it as professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. This is the work that writes a new algorithm, drafts a compelling legal argument, or designs a new architectural structure.
A high-value output.
Yes. Newport's core economic argument is that as AI and automation effortlessly consume shallow work, the human ability to drop into deep work is becoming simultaneously more rare due to smartphone addiction and vastly more economically valuable.
And Newport approaches this not just as a philosophy, but as an architectural challenge. Like, how do you actually build this into a modern life?
Right.
He outlines 4 distinct philosophies for scheduling deep work, recognizing that not everyone has the same environmental control.
The sources detail these 4 approaches brilliantly. First is the monastic philosophy. This is the extreme end of the spectrum. It involves total, uncompromising isolation. You eliminate or radically minimize all shallow obligations. You delete your social media. You turn off your email autoresponder.
Very intense.
Extremely. Think of a computer science PhD going off-grid for 6 months to write their dissertation. It yields incredible results, but it requires a life completely decoupled from daily collaborative demands.
Which renders it practically useless for the vast majority of professionals who have managers, direct reports, and client SLAs.
True. So Newport offers the bimodal philosophy. This is for people who can divide their time into clearly defined extended stretches. You might spend Monday through Wednesday as a normal, highly accessible employee doing shallow work, answering emails within 10 minutes, attending every meeting.
Okay.
But Thursday and Friday, you disappear into a deep work retreat. You are unreachable. Academics often utilize this teaching and doing administration during the fall semester and doing isolated research during the summer.
Still, demanding entire days of unresponsiveness is a political luxury many corporate workers just don't possess.
Which is why the rhythmic philosophy is the most commonly attempted. It relies on creating an unbreakable daily habit. You generate a rhythm every single morning from 6:00 a.m. to 8:00 a.m. before the kids wake up and before the Slack channels come alive. You do 2 hours of deep work.
That takes discipline.
It does. The goal here is to remove the need to invest willpower in deciding when to go deep. The decision is automated. It's just what you do at 6 a.m.
The rhythmic approach relies heavily on environmental cues and neuroplasticity. You train your brain to know that sitting in a specific chair with a specific cup of coffee at 6 a.m. equals focus.
Yeah, setting the scene.
And finally, there is the journalistic philosophy.
This one sounds exhausting. It's the ability to shift into a deep work mode at a moment's notice anytime an unexpected window opens up. If a 30-minute Zoom call gets canceled, you don't scroll the news. You immediately drop into intense, distraction-free focus on a complex problem.
Like flipping a switch.
Yes. Newport named it after journalists who are trained to write complex, nuanced stories on incredibly tight deadlines from noisy press rooms or airport terminals. He specifically warns that this is not for novices.
Because it requires an immense amount of cognitive control. Context switching, moving from an email mindset to a deep analytical mindset, usually incurs a massive attention residue penalty.
Attention residue.
Yeah, it takes the average brain roughly 20 minutes to fully clear the residue of the previous task and lock onto the new one. The journalistic approach requires you to suppress that residue instantly.
Wow. Now, for years, my understanding, and I think the general public's understanding, was that Cal Newport's concept of deep work was essentially synonymous with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's famous psychological concept of the flow state. You lock yourself in a room, you eliminate distractions, you do deep work, and eventually you achieve flow. You hit that magical frequency where time dilates, the work feels totally effortless, your self-consciousness vanishes, and you are just surfing a wave of pure, joyful productivity.
It sounds so appealing.
Doesn't it? Isn't the entire goal of deep work to get into flow?
This is where we encounter the most radical, paradigm-shifting contradiction in our entire stack of sources.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have an essay by R.J. Kaiser called Finding Flow, which dissects a specific viral episode of the Huberman Lab podcast featuring Cal Newport. In that conversation, Dr. Andrew Huberman asks Newport about flow, and Newport explicitly, unequivocally states that deep work is not the flow state.
Wait, what? That fundamentally broke my understanding of productivity. If deep work isn't flow, what is it?
To understand this, Kaiser dives deep into the academic friction between 2 titans of psychology. You have Anders Ericsson, the father of the science of deliberate practice, and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the father of flow. They were studying high performance, but they were looking at entirely different mechanisms.
We need to unpack this because the implications for how we spend our workdays are massive. Let's look at Ericsson's deliberate practice first.
So deliberate practice, according to Ericsson's decades of research on chess grandmasters, Olympic athletes, and concert violinists, is the systematic, highly focused, and often grueling effort required to actually improve performance. It is characterized by pushing yourself just beyond your current capabilities.
So it's not just playing the violin, it's playing the exact three measures that you are terrible at over and over again.
Exactly, because you are constantly operating at the very edge of failure, trying to force your brain to master a pattern it hasn't mastered yet. Deliberate practice is inherently gritty, deeply frustrating, and actively uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable.
Highly uncomfortable. From a neurobiological perspective, deliberate practice is the physical act of building myelin, the fatty tissue that wraps around neural circuits, making the transmission of electrical signals faster and stronger. Wrapping myelin requires immense metabolic effort and friction.
It's the cognitive equivalent of lifting a weight that is slightly too heavy for you. Your muscles have to tear to rebuild stronger.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with flow. Csikszentmihalyi defined flow as an optimal psychological state of intrinsic joy. It happens when your skill level perfectly matches the challenge at hand. It's characterized by a feeling of effortless effort. You aren't thinking about the mechanics, you are just executing.
So, if deliberate practice is stumbling through the sheet music in a dusty practice room, flow is playing the symphony flawlessly on stage at Carnegie Hall.
Yes, that's exactly it. In flow, you are utilizing neural pathways that are already heavily myelinated. The electrical signals are firing effortlessly. It feels incredible. But Newport's groundbreaking argument is that deep work is an application of deliberate practice, not flow.
Oh, wow.
Deep work, by definition, requires you to grapple with complex, novel concepts you don't fully understand yet. It requires you to build new mental models. Therefore, deep work is almost always going to feel physically and emotionally uncomfortable.
Wait, I really need to push back on this. Are we seriously suggesting that we shouldn't actually want our work to feel effortless? We spend millions of dollars on productivity coaches and ergonomic chairs to make work smooth. Is striving for pure, unbroken flow actually a developmental trap?
That is the exact conclusion of the Huberman and Newport discussion. If you optimize your professional life only for the comfort of the flow state, you are leaving vast amounts of your potential unrealized. You are avoiding the painful, frustrating work of skill acquisition.
That's intense.
If your work feels completely effortless every day, you are no longer growing. You are just executing routines you've already mastered.
That is a really harsh reality to swallow.
Kaiser points out a staggering statistic from high-performance psychologist Dr. Michael Gervais to drive this home. Gervais works with Super Bowl champions and Olympians. He found that even these world-class performers, the absolute elite in their fields, are only in a state of flow roughly 15% of the time.
Only 15%.
Just 15. The other 85% of their working lives, they are grinding through the agonizing discomfort of deliberate practice.
That completely upends the expectation of what a productive Tuesday should feel like. If you sit down for your 3 hours of deep work and you feel frustrated, stupid, and tempted to quit, you haven't failed.
Not at all.
That friction is the biological signal that myelin is wrapping around your neurons. You are actually doing it perfectly.
But human nature, combined with evolutionary biology, makes this incredibly difficult to sustain. Our brains are supreme energy conservation machines. We evolved to avoid unnecessary metabolic expenditure. If deep work is actively biologically uncomfortable, our brains will immediately start looking for an escape hatch.
Give me a distraction.
Right. The amygdala registers the frustration as a threat and demands a dopamine hit to soothe the distress.
And in the modern world, we don't have to look far for that dopamine hit. It's sitting right in our pockets. We have built a digital environment perfectly designed to rescue us from the discomfort of deliberate practice. The moment the deep work gets hard, we instinctively reach for a device glowing with infinite, effortless novelty.
Which leads us directly to the technological arms race for our attention.
Right.
If our own willpower isn't strong enough to keep us anchored in the uncomfortable zone of deliberate practice, how do we force ourselves to stay there?
Enter the 2026 Focus app landscape. This is where we examine the absolute zenith of the individual productivity mindset. We have a fascinating review piece from the Frog blog, which tested the top 10 Focus apps of 2026.
Oh, that should be good.
They set the stage with a deeply unsettling metric. The average knowledge worker in 2026 can only focus on a single, uninterrupted screen for 47 seconds before context switching.
47 seconds. You cannot build a new mental model or engage in deliberate practice in 47 seconds. You can barely read a complex paragraph.
It's an attention span completely shredded by the algorithms. And the blog argues that because every social media app is engineered by thousands of behavioral psychologists to hijack your brain's reward prediction errors, a simple egg timer on your desk isn't going to cut it anymore.
No, an egg timer isn't fighting back.
Exactly. You need severe weaponized friction between you and your distractions. The ecosystem of apps they reviewed to provide that friction is bizarre, highly inventive, and honestly deeply dystopian. Let's walk through the arsenal available to the modern worker.
I am fascinated to hear how technology is attempting to save us from technology.
We'll start with the namesake of the blog, an app called Frogged. This app abandons the idea of pause and reinforcement entirely. It relies on personalized, shame-based accountability.
Shame-based.
Yeah. It doesn't just block your distracting apps, it utilizes an AI-driven cartoon frog mascot that monitors your screen time and actively roasts you.
Wow.
If you attempt to open Instagram during a scheduled block, the frog insults your work ethic, your life choices, and your inability to focus using personalized put-downs. The reviewers noted that being brutally psychologically degraded by a digital amphibian is surprisingly effective at making you close the tab.
Well, leveraging social shame, even synthetic shame from an AI, is one of the most powerful behavioral modifiers in human psychology. It bypasses logic and hits the emotional core.
On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, you have apps like Forest. This relies on gamified guilt and pseudo-altruism. You set a timer for your deep work session, and a beautifully animated virtual tree begins to grow on your screen.
Sounds peaceful.
It is, until you leave the app to check your text messages, and the virtual tree instantly dies, leaving a withered, ugly husk in your digital forest.
Brutal.
But the genius mechanic is that as you successfully grow virtual trees, you earn coins that the company uses to plant real trees in the physical world.
So breaking your focus isn't just a personal failure, it's an act of environmental vandalism. It's emotional blackmail.
Exactly. But for people who need something more draconian than shame or guilt, there are apps like Opal and Freedom. These provide brutal cross-device blocking. Opal utilizes Apple's Screen Time API to create deep focus sessions where selected apps are blocked at the OS level. You literally cannot open them.
No bypass.
Can't bypass it with a passcode. Willpower is removed from the equation entirely. The choice is made for you by the software. Freedom does the exact same thing, but syncs across your iPhone, your Mac, and your Windows PC simultaneously.
Creating a digital Faraday cage. You can't just put your locked phone in a drawer and open Twitter on a hidden tab on your laptop. The escape hatches are welded shut across all hardware.
But blocking is just defense. The reviewers also dive into neurological offense. Apps like Brain.fm and Focus at Will, these aren't just playing ambient rain sounds or lo-fi hip-hop. They use AI-generated functional music that is scientifically engineered to induce something called neural phase locking.
This is where we cross from behavioral psychology into neurobiology.
Let's break down how this actually works. When you are distracted, your brain is usually producing scattered alpha waves. Brain.fm layers specific auditory beat frequencies into the music that are designed to match the frequency of beta or gamma brainwaves, the waves associated with intense, sustained concentration.
Fascinating.
Through the process of phase locking, the external auditory rhythm physically entrains the brain's internal electrical oscillations, dragging your brain out of a scattered state and forcing it into a focused frequency.
It is essentially attempting to chemically and electrically induce focus through targeted auditory stimulation. It's literally a biohack.
And finally, for the truly distracted, the reviewers looked at Centered. This app provides an AI voice coach that watches your digital behavior in real time. It detects if you switch tabs away from your primary Figma or Word document, and a calm, slightly disappointed AI voice will speak directly into your headphones, gently reminding you to get back on task.
A disappointed AI.
It's like having a hypervigilant productivity coach standing over your shoulder, monitoring your eye movements.
Which raises a profound existential question.
What's that?
We are looking at a professional landscape where an adult needs AI voice coaches, shame-spewing cartoon frogs, OS-level lockdowns, and brainwave-altering frequency music just to read a strategic document for more than 47 seconds.
Yeah.
Are we seriously arguing that a technological band-aid can solve a fundamentally systemic technological disease?
The reviewers at the Frog blog actually address this paradox head-on, and it's a remarkably honest admission from a platform that exists to review focus apps. They state, here's the uncomfortable truth. No focus app will fix a lifestyle designed for distraction.
It's treating a catastrophic symptom while ignoring the underlying pathology.
They point out the biological reality. If you are sleeping 4 hours a night, if you are doom scrolling in bed until 2 a.m., if you reach for your phone the millisecond you open your eyes in the morning, your brain is marinating in high cortisol and dopamine exhaustion.
You're running on fumes.
Exactly. Your dopamine receptors are literally downregulated. An AI frog yelling at you is not going to save you from a shredded, exhausted nervous system.
You cannot out-app biological exhaustion.
Let me give you an analogy. Using these apps is like putting a titanium padlock on your refrigerator. It absolutely stops you from eating the cake right now, this exact second. It solves the immediate behavioral problem.
Right.
But a padlock doesn't cure your underlying sugar addiction. It doesn't stabilize your insulin levels. And it certainly doesn't teach you how to cook a nutritious meal. The apps are powerful tools, but they require a baseline foundation of sleep, exercise, and intentionality to actually be effective, rather than just being instruments of digital torture.
And this, right here, is exactly where the conversation usually stops in the mainstream productivity world.
It is.
The narrative arc is complete. The assumption is that if you get your sleep hygiene right, if you write down your Ivy Lee list of 6 items the night before, if you courageously embrace the biological discomfort of deep work, and you use an OS-level blocker to eliminate digital distractions, you have solved the puzzle of modern work.
You're a hero.
Right. You, the sovereign individual, have conquered your day.
I mean, as the advocate for the individual here, it sounds like an incredibly robust, bulletproof plan. If I have my beautifully prioritized bento box of tasks and I've eaten my most toxic frog first thing in the morning and my phone is locked in a digital vault, what could possibly go wrong? I am a productivity machine.
Everything can go wrong.
Wait, everything?
Yes, because the entire framework we have discussed for the last 30 minutes rests on a single, massive, structurally flawed assumption.
Okay, what's the assumption?
It assumes that you are a solo operator in a vacuum. It assumes that the only variable that matters to your success or failure is your own personal internal willpower. But we are about to pull the rug completely out from under that worldview.
Oh, boy.
We are going to transition from the realm of personal habits to a systemic reality where individual willpower is completely, structurally irrelevant to your survival.
Okay, I am bracing myself. My Tupperware containers are shaking. We are shifting from the individual productivity mindset to the professional services reality. This is heavily drawn from the Dutiful article, which frankly read like an operational horror story for anyone working in a corporate environment.
It is a deeply sobering piece of structural analysis. It specifically examines industries like corporate law, high-level accounting, migration services, architecture, healthcare administration, any highly regulated field where you're managing complex, legally binding obligations for clients.
High-stakes stuff.
Exactly. In these environments, the entire Eat the Frog framework doesn't just fail. It actively contributes to systemic collapse.
I have to challenge that premise. A difficult task is a difficult task, whether I'm a solo freelance graphic designer or a senior partner at a law firm. Why would Brian Tracy's framework break down just because the industry is regulated?
Because to understand the failure, we have to completely redefine the fundamental nature of the frog.
Okay, redefine it.
Brian Tracy's frog, the difficult, aversive task you are dreading, is entirely static. It just sits there on your plate. It's unpleasant today, it will be exactly as unpleasant tomorrow, and it will be exactly as unpleasant in 3 weeks.
Right.
The cost of avoiding Tracy's frog is purely internal and emotional. You feel guilty, you pay a cognitive tax. But in professional services, frogs are not static, emotional unpleasantries. In regulated industries, frogs are deadlines.
Deadlines, the external constraints.
And deadlines do not just sit statically on a plate. The Dutiful piece introduces a brilliant, terrifying metaphor to explain the difference. Professional frogs ripen, and as they ripen, they metabolize poison.
Metabolizing poison. That is a visceral, incredibly stressful image. Walk me through how a task metabolizes poison.
Let's trace the life cycle of a professional frog. A new client matter arrives on a junior associate's desk. The work is intellectually interesting, and the filing deadline is 6 weeks away. At this moment, it's not a frog at all. It's a pleasant, entirely manageable tadpole.
Cute tadpole.
You enjoy working on it. But say you get distracted. You use your Ivy Lee method, you limit your list to 6 items, and you prioritize other urgent fires. That tadpole sits on your desk untouched.
Still not a problem. The deadline is weeks away.
Exactly. But as the days tick by, the nature of the task begins to alter. It begins to ripen. Being mildly late on an internal follow-up meeting turns into a formal breach of a client service level agreement.
Oh.
That breach sharpens into a statutory failure to file a motion. The statutory failure sharpens into a massive, notifiable malpractice claim.
But the actual work required, like typing the document, submitting the form, didn't change.
That is the crucial insight. The physical keystrokes required to execute the task remained identical, but the consequence of the task has mutated. It went from a routine Tuesday afternoon chore to a career-ending, firm-destroying event, simply because of how long it sat untouched in the dark.
Wow.
The toxicity of the task compounded entirely independently of your attention.
So, if the toxicity is compounding invisibly, what does this mean for our numerical hacks? Why do the 135 and the 333 rules, which seemed so logical 20 minutes ago, actively fail when confronted with toxic frogs?
They fail catastrophically for three very specific structural reasons. The first reason is invisibility. All of our individual productivity rules, Ivy Lee, Eat the Frog, the Pomodoro technique, rely on visual management.
Right, seeing the tax.
They assume that the frog is sitting right in front of you on a plate. You can see it, you can evaluate its size, and you can consciously choose whether or not to eat it.
Right, the 135 rule requires you to explicitly write it down on a piece of paper.
But in professional services, the most dangerous radioactive frogs aren't sitting on your desk. They are invisible. They are statutory deadlines buried on page 37 of a 40-page retainer document that was emailed to you an hour ago, which you haven't even had time to open yet.
Oh no.
Or they're automated court orders that arrived in your digital inbox while you were on a 2-week vacation. You cannot prioritize what you cannot see. And unlike Tracy's static frog, the invisible frog is ticking down on its own chronological clock, metabolizing poison in the dark, regardless of your awareness.
Wow. So I could be executing my visible Ivy Lee list flawlessly, feeling an incredible dopamine high of productivity while remaining totally blind to a bomb ticking under my desk.
Precisely. The second reason these individual rules fail is silent compounding. Remember the psychological mechanism behind the 135 rule. It explicitly caps your list at 9 items to fit within the biological limits of human working memory.
George Miller's magical number 7, plus or minus 2.
Exactly. That constraint is wonderful for daily execution. A single ripening frog is manageable. But what happens to a senior accountant or a migration agent who isn't carrying one frog, but 40 of them, distributed unevenly across the next 90 days?
The working memory capacity just shatters.
It completely collapses. While you are beautifully efficiently executing tasks number 1 through 36 using your 333 containers, listening to your brain.fm phase-locking music toxic frog number 37 is silently rotting in a closed digital folder.
Waiting to explode.
You do not feel the emotional dread or the pressure of Frog 37 until it's too late, because the first 36 tasks absorbed 100% of your cognitive capacity. By the time Frog 37 forces its way into your awareness, it is too toxic to handle safely.
It's past the point of intervention. And the third reason.
The third systemic failure point is a lack of sovereignty. The 7-8-9 rule, working for 7 hours, sleeping for 8, living for 9, is a beautiful, humane, boundary-setting exercise. It assumes that you, the individual, have ultimate sovereignty and control over your calendar.
Which you don't.
The reality of regulated industries is that external entities, courts, federal tax authorities, immigration tribunals, regulatory bodies, do not care about your work-life boundaries.
They don't care that I've blocked out 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. for deep work.
They absolutely do not. They dictate rigid dates with legally binding financial consequences. The frogs arrive on their schedule, not yours, and they start ripening immediately. Your sovereign bento box is crushed by the external reality of statutory deadlines.
Let me try to synthesize this with a new metaphor, because the idea of just eating the frog doesn't work anymore. Using personal productivity apps and willpower hacks in a highly regulated firm is like trying to diffuse a sprawling network of hidden landmines using nothing but a beautifully organized, color-coded map of your own backyard.
Wow.
You might be incredibly efficient at navigating the map, but the map is entirely irrelevant to the actual danger. You are optimizing the wrong reality.
That is an incredibly accurate description of the failure pattern. A legal practitioner can have a perfectly optimized Ivy Lee list. They can execute flawlessly with healthy 7-8-9 boundaries. They can meditate, and they can still miss a career-ending statutory deadline simply because it wasn't on the visual list they were optimizing. They ate every single frog they could see, but the toxic one was hidden in an unopened email.
This is genuinely terrifying. If personal productivity rules, the very things we all rely on to feel sane and in control of our lives, can actually cause professional negligence by making us blind to external invisible deadlines, how on earth do organizations protect themselves? It can't just be a manager yelling at staff to try harder to remember.
It cannot be a behavioral directive because, as we've established, human working memory is a biological bottleneck. The dutiful article makes a profound architectural argument here. The failure pattern we are seeing, the missed deadlines, the frantic weekend catch-ups, the malpractice claims, is rarely caused by individual laziness or incompetence.
Which is strangely comforting, honestly.
It should be a relief to knowledge workers everywhere. It is a systemic failure. It is fundamentally a fraud detection problem. Therefore, the solution is not to send your exhausted staff to another time management seminar, and it's not to buy them premium enterprise subscriptions to the Frog app.
Right.
The solution is to build a firm-level, structural backstop system. You have to entirely remove the burden of deadline detection off the individual's flawed, finite working memory and place it onto a relentless institutional architecture.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of this architecture. How do you actually build a systemic frog detector? The dutiful piece breaks this backstop system down into 4 specific non-negotiable layers. What is the first layer?
The first layer is capture. And this is where most firms fail instantly. Capture has to happen immediately at the boundary of the firm. The exact moment any incoming document, retainer, court order, or client correspondence arrives, whether by email, portal, or mail, it must be computationally parsed for dates and obligations. This cannot happen at the end of the week during a weekly review session. It must happen the moment it crosses the threshold.
No waiting.
If you don't capture the frog immediately, it enters the dark matrix of the firm and starts ripening unseen.
So you are taking the invisibility problem and solving it at the door. You drag every single frog into the light immediately. What's the second layer?
Classify. Because not all dates have the same toxicity. A missed internal follow-up meeting about a marketing brochure is a tadpole. It's annoying, but survivable.
Right.
A missed statute of limitations filing for a multi-million-dollar litigation is a highly toxic, radioactive frog that will destroy the firm. The system has to automatically tag every captured deadline by its specific consequence class. The architecture needs to know mathematically which frogs are going to ripen fast and explode and which ones can wait.
That makes total sense. You are replacing the subjective, emotional dread of Brian Tracy's method with an objective, risk-based prioritization algorithm. And the third layer?
The third layer is surface. And this layer requires a complete paradigm shift in user interface. It changes how the professional interacts with their daily reality.
How so?
Right now, most people open their task manager or their calendar and see a chronological list of what they want or plan to do today. A backstop system changes the default screen entirely. When you open your dashboard, it shouldn't show you your next task. It should aggressively show you the next failure.
Wait, explain that distinction. The next failure.
You must automatically surface the frogs most at risk of going uneaten, based on their classification and proximity to the deadline, without the user having to actively search for them. It flips the question from, what do I feel like doing right now, to what is mathematically about to detonate in my portfolio?
That completely flips the psychological paradigm. You don't have to rely on your working memory to remember frog number 37 because the system shoves frog 37 to the top of the screen the moment it reaches critical toxicity.
Exactly. And the final, most crucial layer, the safety net, is the backstop itself. Because individuals, no matter how well-intentioned, disciplined, or supported by UI, will eventually miss things. Humans are fragile.
Yeah, life happens.
They get COVID, their kids get sick, they have a mental health crisis, or they simply get overwhelmed by an unexpected emergency. A true backstop system requires strict automated escalation rules.
So what happens when a deadline gets close?
If a primary worker misses a highly toxic frog, or if that frog gets dangerously close to the deadline without a logged action, the system automatically bypasses the worker and surfaces the threat to a second person, a partner, a department manager, or a specialized risk colleague.
See, this is the layer that no personal productivity app can ever offer because personal apps are inherently built to protect silos. My beautifully curated 135 list does not talk to your 135 list. If I am drowning, my app just tells me I'm failing. It doesn't automatically ask you for a life raft.
And that siloed individualism is where the ultimate existential danger lies for a business. Because we have to extrapolate this entire conversation up to the level of firm-level liability. When a toxic frog actually detonates, When that statute of limitations is missed and a client suffers a massive, irreversible financial loss, who actually pays the
I
price?
mean, the junior associate who buried the email probably gets fired immediately.
They might lose their job. But plaintiffs and the aggressive malpractice lawyers who represent them do not just sue a junior associate. A junior associate making $80,000 a year doesn't have any recoverable assets.
Oh.
They sue the practice, they aim the lawsuit directly at the firm's balance sheet, they trigger the multi-million-dollar professional indemnity insurance policy, and in some partnership structures, they go after the personal assets of the senior partners. The firm is the deepest pocket.
Oh, wow. The stakes just became astronomical. So every single hidden, unclassified deadline sitting quietly in a junior staffer's private email inbox is actually a ticking financial liability for the owners of the company.
Precisely. The liability is doubly shared, even if the visibility of the work is siloed. Every uncaught fraud carried in secret by an overwhelmed employee is the fraud carried by the entire firm's balance sheet.
So you have to see the load.
Yes. Therefore, having structural visibility into these deadlines is not a matter of annoying micromanagement. And it is certainly not a soft wellness perk to help staff feel less stressed. Cognitive load tracking is a critical, fundamental operational instrument for survival.
Because if you can't see the load, you can't balance it.
If a partner can look at a dashboard and clearly see that Associate A is carrying 47 active high-risk deadlines, while Associate B is only carrying 12, that dictates immediate reallocation. You move the radioactive work from the overloaded person before the cognitive failure happens.
That's proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It dictates strategic hiring. You don't hire a new staff member based on a subjective gut feeling that everyone looks busy. You hire because the system data proves a sustained mathematical overload of toxic frogs. It even dictates pricing and intake. You know exactly when you have the leverage to raise prices or when you must turn away new clients, because you can mathematically prove that the firm's cognitive capacity is saturated.
So to synthesize this entire massive journey we've been on, to survive modern knowledge work, we have to undergo a fundamental psychological shift. We have to move away from what I would call a private inbox mentality. Right now, the entire ethos of corporate productivity culture encourages us to carry our frogs alone, in secret.
Completely isolated.
Yeah. We use our 1-3-5 lists, our Pomodoro timers, and our shame-based apps to wage a private, isolated war against our tasks. And if we start drowning, we usually hide it out of shame until it's too late.
The culture of individual heroism.
Exactly. We need to dismantle that and shift to a shared load mentality, a culture where deadlines and frogs are systematically made visible to the entire team by default so they can be managed collectively, escalated safely, and diffused before they turn toxic.
That is the ultimate, undeniable conclusion of comparing these sources. Personal productivity rules, eating the frog, utilizing the bento boxes of time, enduring the friction of deliberate practice, they are excellent necessary tools.
Oh, absolutely.
They teach you how to eat efficiently, how to chew your food, how to build myelin, but a backstop system is the only thing that tells you what is actually on the plate. If you are eating perfectly, with pristine focus and flawless boundaries, but you are completely blind to the radioactive frog under your napkin, the system still fails. You need both the personal discipline to execute the work and the systemic architecture to ensure you are executing the right work at the right time.
What an incredible perspective-altering deep dive this has been today. We started with the almost comical image of AI cartoon frogs roasting us for opening TikTok. We traveled back in time to explore Charles Schwab's $400,000 to-do list from 1918 and the biological limits of working memory.
What a ride.
We unpacked the truly uncomfortable myelin-building reality of deliberate practice versus the seductive, effortless illusion of the flow state. And finally, we arrived at the terrifying realization that personal time management apps, no matter how draconian or neurologically advanced, simply cannot save us from the toxic compounding deadlines of the professional world. We need institutional systems, not just individual willpower.
It's a complete reframing of what it means to be a responsible, productive professional in a complex world.
It really is. And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final unmentioned thought to mull over. Something that builds on the tension of everything we've discussed today. If we are constantly, desperately seeking out personal productivity hacks, if we are downloading shame-based apps, trying to biohack our brainwaves, and obsessing over organizing our 333 Tupperware containers just to survive our daily work lives, Are we actually just using our own finite individual willpower to mask the operational failures of the companies we work for? Are you burning yourself out, destroying your nervous system, trying to be more efficient at a job whose fundamental architecture and systems are entirely broken?
A provocative question, and absolutely one worth taking into your next deep work session.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We wish you the absolute best of luck in building your backstops and finding your frogs before your frogs find you. See you next time.